Good morning again, everybody. It's not yet morning in Lebanon, but good morning to everybody. We have another professor, and I hope she will be able to excite me and excite you as much as I was excited listening to Dr. Eduardo's presentation. Carolina is a professor in actuarial science at the University of Buenos Aires, and we look forward to hearing your views.
Thank you, Dr. Muhana. Well, this is a presentation about actuarial prudential regulation in health coverages and the role of the actuary from a Latin American perspective. The three speakers, the three persons that prepared the presentation, we all work at the Center of Research in Insurance at the Universidad of Buenos Aires, Dr. Eduardo Melinsky, Dr. Daniel Sarto, and I. And we're all very thankful to be able to speak in the ICA this year. So for a brief presentation about what we're going to be speaking, our research mainly deals on health systems, and it was motivated by the failures of the Argentinian health system, the failures our own system has, and the effect they have on consumers. We all know that health systems have components that are private and have other components that are public components. In a lot of ways they interact. We have started with private components and for the initial part of the research, and we are trying to map the structure and try to analyze the regulation, and our idea is to come up with a best practice prudent regulation considering the differences they have with traditional insurance and the difference they have between countries. Well, our agenda is to speak about actuarial concerns on regulation, the actuarial point of view on the regulation, but applied to the structure of these systems. Then what roles actuaries play or should play for the health, we could say, of the health system. And we leave at the end of the presentation, we're leaving a list of resources because, well, actually we believe that the more the eyes, the better. I mean, these are, at least in Latin America, and in a lot of countries in Latin America, these are some forms of health coverage that in certain ways have not been looked at technically, or at least they don't have the technical components that we believe they have in order to increase their efficiency. And what are the points on which we are focusing? We are focusing on what we could call the usual ones, which are pricing of the coverage, which are reserving and capital requirements. And we're also trying to focus on certain aspects that public and private systems have in common. For instance, some points of stress. I mean, the systems have stress related to the cost of what we could actually sum up as technology, which is cost of medications, of treatment, etc. The cost they endure during these pandemic years, the expectations they all have on coverage, on quality, the increase on demand. I mean, this is largely based on perception. And we could separate them because the public systems actually, they in several countries are like a baseline of coverage. The problems have similarities, which the ones that Eduardo described, for instance, Asian populations. I'm sorry, and the private ones are usually working, we're saying usually because it differs between countries, working as a complement, or actually even more, actually in some ways are the main source, the main provider. So they endure a lot of stress on several aspects, including limitations on pricing. For instance, here in Argentina, we have a limit on what we can, on the price that the health coverage can charge, and also have increases that are prescribed by the government. They have a cost or political risk that are related to an increasing coverage. In several ways, the matter of including or adding certain coverage in the plan depends on a political decision, and even in some ways it can be added overnight. So in order to say in a very brief matter of time. So they're actually private plans, but they are subject to a lot of the stress that in some ways public plans have. The first part of the study is based on looking at what these systems are and their structures to see if they have similarities, if they have common points of regulations, and also the matter of statistics, which is not a minor aspect because data production of these systems varies largely, and the production of data between the components and the quality of the data is also very, very different among them. The first one, of course, what we looked at is the health system of Argentina. The sources of the pictures are from an international healthcare funding report produced by if I don't recall badly, it is in the sources by the International Actuarial Association and the Society of Actuaries, I believe. These are really good graphics in order to understand how these elements interact together in one page. We can see here the Argentinian health system in which the private system works as a complement. They are called a prepaid medicine. And one of the aspects we looked at is if they have a supervisory or a regulation body, which one is it? In the case of Argentina, it is the same as the one for what we could call union collective health coverage. We could say that they are actually a private health insurance system, but without any technical liabilities or minimum capital. It's actually not, it's prescribed by law, but not regulated, so it is not enforced. So this system is really subject to a lot of risk, depending, or actually because of the lack of these aspects. We can see here that they are also subject to restrictions on premium level. They are actually adjusted to inflation, and they don't cover a lot of the population. The main coverage is based on the public system and some union or union coverages, but they are also subject to increases in cost, whether it be by technology, whether it be by inflation, or whether it be by the increases in coverage by regulation, which is which has been around the years that we looked at higher than the increases in prices. Then we looked at Brazil. You can see the same graph here, which, as we said, is a good way of having all mapped in one page. Brazil also has a private health coverage system, which is called Saúde Suplementar, and it also has a supervisory authority, and their capital and their technical liabilities and the capital is, at the time we looked at the system, was regulated, was based on premiums and losses, is more similar to a traditional form of insurance. And they also have risk management requirements as opposed to the Argentinian health system. They produce more data, and it is easy to find more data than our system has, and the data is also, at least from the samples we took, consistent throughout the years. Then there is the Chilean health system. The Chilean health system has some figures that are called ISAPRES. They are private, they are voluntary, the contribution is compulsory, but workers can choose, it is for workers, can choose between a health system administered by the central government or between these figures. They also have a unified regulation and supervisory authority. They have guidelines regarding risk management. They have some limitations. By law, there are not so many ISAPRES as there are other forms of insurance, They have capital and solvency requirements, and they have a form of technical provisions also prescribed by law under investments also. And we can also find that we also found that the supervisor produces regular reports on the health of the system. We also looked at Colombia. Colombia also has the figure of a form of private health insurance, which is a health promoting insurance, and another private system. And they also have a unified regulation and supervisory authority. They have guidelines requiring, at the moment we looked at the system, requiring risk management and also solvency, some solvency and technical liabilities, which are different from the other two systems we looked at, Brazil and Chile, that have them. We're still looking at some other countries in Latin America and to their statistics, but why we are doing this study? Our idea is to, as I said in the beginning, our idea is to try to find what we call a best practice, trying to compare these figures that are all interacting with the public health system, whether it be because of the coverage, which are all subject to political risk and limitations, which are not so common in other forms of insurance. They have a lot of exposure, and they have also had a lot of exposure these past few years because of the pandemic. And one of our points of view is the role of the actuary. We can see that regulations differs in some points vastly among countries. In some of these countries, the actuarial function is clearly defined, and in some other countries, it is not. And we can also find a really limited participation of the actuary. Remember, this is a preliminary report, so we are still trying to find more sources for data. We have found some similarities, which are the actuarial role is mainly focused on premium, on pricing, but there are some other aspects that in certain systems are being left behind, like risk management requirements, adequate technical liabilities and solvency requirements. And in some of these countries, the role of actuary is not taking part so definedly in the regulation and supervisory body. So we're seeing that this is an opportunity for improvement, and we're also seeing that communication, as Eduardo remarked in his presentation, communicating clearly and timely these issues to policymakers and particularly to stakeholders can lead to the prevention of some future failures. For instance, here in Argentina, if you took a sample of population, people often confuse the coverage they have or the coverage they are using in a certain point of time. People confuse a coverage which is a union collective health coverage, which is one of the points we saw in the mapping of the health system, versus private individual coverage, when actually people have the two coverages and have bridges between them. So if people cannot distinguish the coverage they have, at least they will know what to demand and where to make an improvement. And the regulators also, if people can access both, can demand both, can choose willingly between both, which is not a bad thing, but which one bears the liabilities, for instance? So we believe that actuaries have to speak up, have to have a clearly defined role, and have to be able to transmit the idea, not only of which systems we're using, which are the technical foundations of the system that should be respected in order to have a better coverage for all the population, given the cost a failure of the system has on the consumers. And also, we believe that this could be an improvement in the cost of the systems. We're trying to look at statistics on the impact the regulations, the technical regulations have on the health system costs and quality, and how does the the question here is, how does the technical health of the health system impact on its costs and on its quality and on the effect it has on the population? Remember, the health system, particularly these intersections between health systems, are particularly difficult to measure there and to find consistent data between time. Well, we have here we also try to we found data from the OECD regarding the percentage of the health system has in expenditure. This is mapped throughout the years, for at least for the countries we had in our sample. The life expectancy in years from these systems, remember this is all combined from the whole of the system that we saw in the graphic, and some statistics for the results of the health system. For instance, one statistic which is related with deaths per 1,000 live births. So we can all see that between countries this varies greatly. And the idea here is to try to find data between the parts of the health system, costs and results. Well, the presentation continues with a list of the sources. These are the sources at the moment. They have list the main sources for the preliminary report of the regulation. There are in several languages, there are in Spanish and in Portuguese. And we're trying to produce a report on the best practice for this, for mapping another health system for the end of this year. Well, thank you for your attention, and here are our contact details in case you would want to have a question or you want some copy of the or to access some of our reports.
Thank you, Caroline. And it's so nice to have you leaving us with so much more time for discussions, and you are not off the hook. Just to make sure that the time you saved us, we will engage you more in question and answer session. We will have a break right now for the reorganizing of the session. Thank you and welcome back, everybody. I would like to, I didn't do the proper thanks for the ICA organizers at the very beginning. I think it's right now, after listening to all the sessions and the way it is running, I can say proper thank you. And I would like to say thank you in particular, the choice of the 3 sessions and the order of the sessions makes a lot of sense. It starts with Stephen talking about surveys, talking about opinions, and these are the things that are needed to establish a fund, a social security, or to reform a fund, to know really the feedback from the constituents and from all the different stakeholders. So I think the surveys are very important. We refer to them in business as market studies, and I would like to ask a couple questions to Steve about that. Steve, you didn't talk about the expectation in the replacement rate. They talk about adequacy, but do they talk about replacement rate? They like Dr. Eduardo said initially, people benefit 100% replacement of their salaries into Social Security. Is your survey, did it ask for a certain expected replacement rate?
I don't think specifically a replacement rate, but one thing we see is that people tend to adjust when they get into retirement. Even they adapt to whatever their situation is. So replacement rate might not be as important of an indicator for some of these people we find, as much as they do things like they reduce expenses and so forth. So there's some sort of adjustment there.
It is interesting because also Dr. Eduardo mentioned a lot about communication with people before any reform. So part of the communication is awareness, making people understand that by the time they are 60 and above, their children already finished schooling, most likely they already paid their house, their mortgages, so they should expect a lower income from the previous. So that's part of the communication. And of course, it differs from one country to another. Like in the US, you have Medicare, so you have healthcare after retirement. In other countries, they don't have healthcare after retirement. So pension is important for them because they end up paying most of their healthcare system. So this is something I wanted to ask you about. I have a question to Dr. Eduardo. In one of your slides, you had written IFRS, but you did not dwell on it. The IFRS, the International Financial Accounting Standards. When you were talking about the guidelines from ISSA, the guidelines from the IAA, and you did mention IFRS. Are you prescribing that Social Security should subscribe to IFRS 17, for example? Is this something that, in your opinion? You are on mute. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Well, 17 is for insurance. It's not.
Right.
It's not the same. No. But you have to show which are the liabilities.
That's right.
And you have many ways of showing the liability, but one way is the classical IAS 19, which is showing the accrued liabilities according to projected benefit obligation. No, that's the word.
Yeah, I believe IAS 19 is for closed funds, not for open funds, not for Social Security. It's primarily for occupation pension schemes.
This is a first stage. So I think that it should be shown different levels of information. The first level would be the evaluation of benefit in course, what is being paid now. Then, additionally, the benefits that are accrued by the existing active population. But also, I understand we have to show a closed population of the existing database of participants to make the evaluation with the full projection of income and outcomes. But there is a very complicated problems when you are considering an open population, right? When you include incomes, and there is where Madoff schemes appears in many cases when people which call themselves actuaries perform some kind of valuation with mathematical projections of a growing population, and the factor of increasing incoming people, they generally, it seems that they try to use an hypothesis that gives good results, and many times those hypotheses would say, hey, if you want to pay to the people of you will need the population not only of your country to pay those benefits, you will need the population of all the continent for paying the benefits of your country.
Thank you. So one more comment I expect from you.
I think that the most you can do is to use the demographic projections, and everything out of the demographic projections is fantasy. It's a risk, and it's a pure malpractice, and it's a very complicated thing. And many cases I have seen this malpractice in several countries or institutions. It depends.
Dr. Eduardo, one more comment I'd like from you, if possible, briefly, so I can come to Caroline. You talked about communication before any reform. do you think the communication that is coming from the ILO and WHO, that Social Security is a human right, will make difficult for any other communication, because then the public, they think it's their right without realizing somebody have to pay for it? So do you think that kind of propaganda that Social Security is a human right without talking about somebody, it's a contractual relationship and somebody have to pay for it? Can you make a comment in a minute, please?
Well, it's a simple. The problem is the wallet. If the wallet has enough money, you can pay everything. If you don't have a big wallet, you cannot pay. So
Thank you.
one subject is to show now this is the situation. You have these incomes, these outcomes. Tomorrow, after tomorrow, and afterwards, this will happen. This is physical things that will happen. We are making actuarial projection. We are working with the lemma, the famous lemma of the Institute of Actuaries, no?
Thank you.
Making certain through uncertain.
Thank you very much. Caroline, throughout today's session, we heard the word DB, and then we heard the word DC when some countries in Latin America, and you are from Latin America, which is the transition. I label the DB, which the original Social Security, as version 1 of Social Security, and all the reforms that took place since then are version 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, whatever, until the DC came about, which is really a version 2. And lately, healthcare is a very big issue, especially healthcare after retirement. And I believe that's not DB, that's not DC, that's UB, undefined benefit. And this is what I'll be talking about later on today. How do you think about healthcare being a Social Security and this sophisticated funding of healthcare after retirement?
Well, in the countries we've seen, the same thing happens. I mean, there is some sort of defined benefit in the style that they are demanding coverages, at least by regulation, but they're also defining limits on contribution by regulation. So it is a strong tension between the benefits you are wishing to get from the system and the contributions you are wishing the system has. There is the idea is there is nothing in between. So you are demanding they give coverage for a certain amount, which is not technically calculated. So if the system doesn't have enough money, and which happens sometimes with private systems, I mean, here in Argentina, our report is the idea is to compare Argentina with other countries in Latin America, at least in order not to get objections from the type that you are comparing populations and political problems very different. They're not the same, but they're closely related sometimes. And we find that tension in the whole system. The contribution is not clearly defined, but sometimes has a lot of limits, and the benefits are sometimes or a lot of times increasing. So it is neither one nor the other.
One more question for you. One of your slides, you talked about the health indicators when you were measuring health system. One of them is per capita expenditure, percentage of the GDP. One is life expectancy, and one is infant mortality. These three have been used a lot by OECD, by the World Bank, but actually, I haven't seen anyone doing correlation between these stuff. Percent of the GDP, we've seen the healthcare system in the United States. The percent of the GDP is very, very high on healthcare, where in other countries that's very low, but does not mean the system is better. One point I would like to ask you, when infant mortality is going down, have you done any work about poverty going up? Because sometimes when you are cutting down infant mortality, actually the high infant mortality was in a certain low-income socioeconomic society. And now you are saving these children, and then you are bringing them into poverty. So is this, in your opinion, have you done any kind of correlation studies between lowering infant mortality and increasing poverty?
We're actually trying to cut the data, trying to find a way of cutting the data and segmenting between the systems, because the public system covers some form of population, and in some cases which do not have the economic capacity in order to buy coverage, and the private system covers another. And the idea is trying to find indicators separated by system, because global indicators per country do not point out which system has the problem. I mean, if the problem is related to poverty, if the problem is related to the system not given an adequate coverage. So they cover different populations with different access to health systems, and sometimes different physical access to health facilities. But here we are encountering the problem of data, a huge data problem. I mean, it is not measured. I mean, it is not even looked at in certain aspects. So we believe it's related, but we need more data.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I think we ran out of time. I would like to each one of you have one concluding remark, if possible, just like a minute to conclude. If something come to your mind before we close the session, starting with Steve.
Yeah, I just want to say, I really believe communication really is key. I mean, it was, I think, just very well brought out and a good point. We see lots of misunderstanding of Social Security, other systems. So, I think it impacts individuals, and I really do think communication is vital as part of this. So,
thank you, Dr. Eduardo.
I think that the final word is we have to work in education of the different participants in the different areas. In Social Security, you have to have educated people in the Social Security institutions, in the Ministry of Economy, in the government. You have to make bigger rings with each ring with more people from the public sector to the private sector and unions. And you have to put all together, and you have to give the same language, the same material, the same understanding of the problem. When people understand which is the problems and which are the limitations of the wallet, they change their mind. And recently, I had experience in a country where I explained what you are demanding for benefits is not affordable for the economy. I explained to a general secretary of labor of a country in front of a minister. And the following day, there was not more riots. This is what happened. It's when you explain and people has good, it's kind people with wanted to do something good, many times they don't know which is the problem. They are asking for they think it's needed, but they don't know if it is affordable. The needs and if it is affordable. That's
Caroline, what's your take?
I believe that the role of the actuary is crucial in communicating and in educating people, but also in looking at these problems that we could talk about in health coverages that are often underlooked and which have a great impact in the general well-being of the population. So understanding this system and being able to explain what is happening and what can be improved, I believe it is crucial, applying the knowledge that we have and that we acquired during our formation.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank our presenters on behalf of the participants, I don't know who they are, where they are, and I hope it was beneficial to all, and look forward to seeing you in another event. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for all.
Thank you, everyone.